Hey guys, it's Megan and I'm here with Sierra, our art manager. So today we're just gonna have a conversation about brand, what a brand is, what it means to have a brand, manage a brand, all that good stuff. So I guess just to start, Sierra, how would you define what a brand is?
A brand is a lot of different things. So it's kind of really difficult question. So a brand for a company is kind of the summation of all their parts. And it really lives kind of inside the mind of their target audiences. So a brand is how your company portrays itself and how that portrayal makes your customer feel. And so with that, you always want to communicate who you are with your brand. And so that involves like the logo and the copy and all the different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always say that a brand is the way in which people experience your business. Like down to the customer service that you see, like ultimately that's an extension of a brand, because theoretically like customer service conversations are being infused with a brand message.
Right.
Or like the shirts that people are wearing are your brand colors. Like ultimately any touch point that you have with a business should be an extension of that brand.
Right. And so all the little impressions that people are getting like from a business, those are going to reinforce the idea of what you want the brand to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you got to make sure they're all cohesive. And so they're all kind of communicating the same idea, which is kind of like you want that idea to communicate like why you're doing it and what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So oftentimes people think of their brand as just their logo, but that's a pretty unsafe assumption, right?
Yeah. So first thing you want to tackle when you're creating a brand is why you're doing it. Like, why are you starting this company? What's the purpose behind it? What's your purpose behind it? And how do you want that company to serve the people that you're looking to serve? And then once you've got that figured out, you can kind of start pinpointing what your target audience is. You figure out like how you want this brand to look like in the community that it's in. And so really the logo comes after you figure out the answers to all of those questions, the answers to like, why do you want to do it? What's the purpose? Really, who are you is the first step. And then the second step is the logo. So that way the logo can communicate the answers to those questions.
Yeah, so a lot of times like when I'm having conversations with customers, like before we even get to you and like the design and all of that good stuff, like I'll sit down with them and on a whiteboard or something, we'll literally map out and I'll have like 3 little circles and it's like, what do you do? How do you do it? And why do you do it? And I just have them explore like every single option of defining what it is that they do. And like, it ends up being just a very complicated cluster of a map, but ultimately it gets them thinking about like, what's my actual value? What's my unique selling proposition? Like, what's the thing that makes me stand out amongst my competitors? Because ultimately, you know, all businesses are inherently different, but industry to industry, like everybody's kind of the same. They're serving a similar audience. They're, you know, doing similar services.
Right.
So like you said, like you've got to ultimately figure out like what it is that you're doing and what it is that's different about you. So I often find that little exercise in and of itself like gets people thinking a little bit differently about how to define themselves. So hopefully when it gets to you and you start working on logos, like it's a little bit more defined as to who they are.
Yeah, definitely helps a lot.
Yeah. What are some things that like we talked about defining who you are and all that good stuff, but like what are some other things that people should consider when they're starting fresh, starting to create their brand?
So this is after they figure out who they are. And so now they've got to figure out like who they want to be like in the future, like think in the future, like who do they want to be serving long term? How do they think they're going to change? And they need to figure out like their audience and what their audience is going to want to see, expect to see, or be surprised by in their brand.
Specifically from a design perspective, like when you're thinking about different audiences, like different ages, different genders, different like you know, New York is different than Virginia. Like, people gravitate toward different things in like different areas and different backgrounds. So like, how do you plan for designing for those different audiences? Like, what are some things that you always consider?
A lot of different things. From the start, like when you meet with a client and you come back and there's like a creative brief, or I like meet with them and we get to ask questions, like I'll pick out specific words and try to use those words to interpret the key points that they want their brand to communicate. But beyond that, there's a lot of different things that go into it. I won't talk about color yet. I'll talk about the actual design of it. So like when I design stuff, I draw a lot of inspiration from previous design eras because, one, I love history. And also, two, like I think there's a lot of value in looking at things that have worked for hundreds of years and that people are still using today to inform the trends that are happening now. And so each culture kind of has like their own different design style, and I think it's really interesting to look at different periods of history and different places and how their designs added up and how those designs became that way because of what they were going through at the time, like politically, or like what artistic like movement was happening at the time. And I think that's like a really cool thing and a really cool way to use to kind of look at the logo and say like, okay, like what from those things in the past can be used to create like this new thing where they're trying to communicate, like specifically Lynchburg is a really different demographic than like New York City. And so the history there is different, and a lot of the people there just have different mindsets and views, and a lot of like what they see every day is very different. And so like if you're in Lynchburg, you're driving downtown and you see all the signs and all those brands and all the billboards, or like on Timberlake, all the different signs, like it's going to be really different than what you'd see driving around in New York. And so that is also a really important factor to use to inform like the logo design. Cities like New York, where you have like a longer history, like New York, Atlanta, Nashville, like places where there's a higher concentration of people, they're getting really used to good design because it's been happening for a longer amount of time, and companies and businesses are having to learn different ways to stand out amongst the competition. And so my goal is to, like, the designs that we're doing for people locally is to have people start expecting better things and better brands, and to the point where, like, when they're driving down the streets or of wherever, they can start pointing out, like, that's a logo or that's a brand that I trust.
You bring up an interesting point in terms of brand trust, and we talk about brand trust all the time and the importance of brand consistency and all of that, and we live it like all day, every day, and we know what that means and like what inherently creates a trustworthy brand and what doesn't. But I think sometimes like the average consumer, I think they subconsciously make those decisions all day, but I don't know if they necessarily know why. So in your opinion, like, blanket statement, this is really hard to say, like, down to the individual brand, but like what makes a trustworthy brand and what doesn't?
Okay.
From a logo perspective, at least.
Specifically from like logo and design perspective. Yeah. Okay. I think people inherently know, whether they think about it or not, when something is better designed than not. And so I think they're like you said, like subconsciously they're kind of deciding stuff, but also like there's a lot that goes into it as far as type and color and form. And so if you have a logo that's super unbalanced, I think that's going to communicate distrust instead of trust, unless for some reason the logo is unbalanced and it's on purpose and beautiful and supposed to be that way.
Don't try that at home.
There are rules until the rules don't apply. But there are all these little different things that kind of build together to create a brand and design that somebody would trust. Stuff like composition, like I said earlier, balance, color, typography is a big one. There's a lot of really, really good, beautiful fonts out there and a lot of really bad ones. And once that all comes together, you can create, I think of it almost like a little art piece, like a painting, like something that's taken from years and years of art and design and put it into this one little thing. And while it doesn't communicate wholly what the company is, it communicates the aspects that you want it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a client the other day, and like he was working within a logo that like had kind of been a hodgepodge like collaboration between a group of people. None of them were like really designers, but they had some experience with like the design tools, and so they made this logo. And he was just like, "What do you think about this logo?" And I was like, "Well, sit back and let me tell you." But like I was talking to him even just about how like the letters were kerned in the logo, and kerning is like the space between the individual letters. And you know, the untrained eye can look at it and not see that there's like tiny little variances in the spacing, but like we can look at it and immediately see that something's off. But like you think about if you're reading a book and the book's not printed super well and like some of the letters are kind of smushed together, like you can still read the words, but your brain just kind of stumbles over them a little bit more. And like even that reaction, like that tiny little stumble over reading a company name, it's like your brain kind of like resists against it for a very brief moment, and like that in and of itself creates distrust. Like it's not like you're saying I can't read this as well, so I don't trust this company, but it immediately causes that reaction of pause. And if like other elements of the brand and the design and the experience aren't completely perfect, like that can kind of snowball into like other opinions about the brand. Which is a challenge, especially for like small businesses, I feel like, that are kind of doing the startup thing on their own and trying to create everything from scratch themselves, which is what a lot of small businesses do. And so I feel like that's probably a scary thing to hear of like if your letters aren't kerned perfectly, people might not trust you.
It's going to throw people off.
So like how would you say, other than hiring us, obviously, but like how would you say like a small business owner, startup, small budget, like how would you say they tackle that problem of like creating a trustworthy brand with like no budget and no resources?
I would say if they were doing it themselves, to always keep it simple. Never copy directly what anybody else has, and never use clip art. Look for fonts and type that are tried and true and have been used and used well.
How much do you think like color and color psychology and things like that play into building brand trust?
I think a lot of it does. I think, as you were saying earlier, like the basic form of the logo is going to create that basic form of trust, and so color and all that jazz is secondary, really. But color is like this really beautiful thing that can be used to communicate exactly what you want it to. And so like stuff like red, that I think it can be used to communicate something of like strength and boldness and like excitement. But if you use it the wrong way, then it's angry or like, I don't know, probably passionate, but in a weird way. Same thing with yellow. Like you can use yellow and it can come across as like fresh and energetic and just like new, ready to go, or you can use yellow and it's gonna look dated or like your grandma made it, you know? So it's a fine line, but color plays a large part into it. And so I would say always focus on the basics first and then move into color, but color is always gonna communicate like more of what the brand is. Like how hospitals are always blue. If they were any other color but blue, I think people would question.
Consumers are habitual. Like they in some way, like they want to be told what to expect, but they also like want the freedom to make up their own minds and have like their own free will and all of that. But like, you're right. If a hospital was purple for some reason,
go to it.
That's true. It would, or like you might go to it, but you'll have that like subconscious conversation of like, why is this purple?
Yeah.
You know, that's a great point. What do you think is like one of the biggest visual mistakes that a company can make in terms of their logo?
There's a lot of them. I don't know if there's one big one. One big one, like it has to communicate what you do or what you want to do or something along those lines. Like if you come out with a logo design and it's so separated from what your company is, it's just gonna be a dumpster fire from the start. Like, and then there's other small things like don't squish it, don't stretch it, like respect the logo, don't do weird things to it, because that's your brand and you need to make sure that when people see that it looks like it's being taken care of so that people know that you take care of them.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that like stresses the importance of having brand guidelines that are attached to your logo. Like even if it's just like one small sheet that's, these are my fonts, these are my colors, these are the rules around the logo and like how much space it should be given. Like that in and of itself starts protecting the logo itself and starts setting up like the basis for how the rest of your brand and like brand materials are going to be developed and created. I personally think that I love brand guidelines. I love putting together brand guidelines. I nerd out over them. And I think that like they are the most important things that like as somebody is setting up their brand, or even just like a marketing director has come in and there's no brand guidelines for their organization. Like if I was coming in as a marketing director in that instance, like that would be first order of business is defining what those guidelines are, because that can cover tone that you use in your content. It can cover the brand personality. Like, are you a fun organization? Are you a casual organization? Are you super formal? Like, all of those things, like, they're the literal guidepost for absolutely everything. And so I feel like that's one of the most important things that an organization can do is set out those rules.
Yeah. So when you're writing like brand guidelines, how do you start to decide the rules around tone?
Yeah, a lot of it, kind of like what you were saying earlier, where like when you're having those conversations with clients, like you start picking out little words and like those words inform your design. It's very similar, where like I'll have conversations with the marketing director, the business owners, like whoever the what I call stakeholders are in the organization. And naturally, like as they're explaining what their organization does, and I always ask them the same questions just to kind of see like what are the trends and similarities in their responses, because ultimately they're defining their brand, they're defining their organization just in the conversation that they're having with me. And so I'll take all of those responses, start picking out those similarities and those trends, and then I'll match like those similarities up with whatever consumer research that we've done. Like if the way that, as an example, like if the way that the stakeholders are explaining their organization is super formal, but their audience is Gen Z, I'm gonna be like, okay, like let's figure out how we're gonna meet in the middle here, because those two inherently aren't the same. And so, you know, hopefully the way that they're describing their organization and the customer that they're serving matches up and is the same. And so that makes my job honestly easy, because I'm just defining what has already been defined and what they already know. They just haven't put it on paper. But in instances where they're not the same, then I'll basically have like a point A and a point B, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm over here. Like, what are some similarities that can get me to that middle point? Like, can I be, in the instance of the formal, you know, stakeholders and the Gen Z audience, like, how can I still be professional and trustworthy while still being, you know, a little bit fun and casual. Like,
Right.
what is a tone that I can accomplish that kind of serves both? Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes it takes me a really long time. But I think that's what I love most about it, is kind of like figuring it out and figuring
Right.
out how all of those pieces kind of fit together.
Solving the puzzle.
Yeah, you can think of it as a person. You can think of it as just like its own tiny little entity, because like it touches every single aspect of an organization, of a
Yeah.
community, like of employees, customers, all the things. Like its arms stretch out so much further than just your marketing materials. Like
Yeah.
you're communicating that story, like you're hopefully making people feel something. Like you always want your brand to elicit some sort of emotion, whether that's like an action or reverence or, you know,
Right.
anything. And so you're right, like it is. It's like its own little world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why I like it so much. Is because it's like, I don't know, it's almost like building something from scratch, except it's not at all.
Yeah.
And you get to like you have a chance to like figure things out. Like, okay, so they're saying this. Like, what exactly does that mean that they want? Because words mean different things to different people. And so like it's part like investigating, like part research, and then part like creating, which is all the things that I like and you like.
I love
And
it.
so
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like, in a weird way, we're kind of like psychologists when it comes to brand, because it's like you're trying to get like the true information from the customer or like their customer or research or whatever, but you're also like trying to like change something inherently in the decisions that people make. So it's like we're receiving a lot of information, but we're also trying to like put out a lot of information just in a brand and design and words alone,
right.
to try and change habits, to try and, you know, change impulses or create impulses even, which is really cool. Like I think a lot of times people don't really think about like what we do as changing something. Like I think people look at designers, writers, marketers, whatever, as just the creative people, which is true. We are creative, but like we're also, there's a lot of intentionality behind the decisions that we make and the type that we choose and the tone that we choose and all the things to truly change an outcome. And I think that that's really cool.
Yeah. When, let's say, a client calls you up and they say, hey, I want a logo. And then you guys say, all right, come on in. Like,
let's make a logo.
Let's make a logo. How do you approach the conversation of saying, like, what you need isn't just a logo, it's more than that? How do you start?
Yeah, I start first by asking them why they need a logo. Like, answer a question with a question, ultimately. And like, if it's, well, I'm starting a business, it's like, okay, well, like, let's talk about your business and talk about your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? And essentially kind of work backwards from there. Like,
right.
You have these goals, like your goals and your, you know, problems or issues or whatever, like the things that you want to do can't ultimately be solved by just a logo. So let's talk about your brand message. Let's talk about, you know, your trajectory. Let's put some marketing strategies behind like what those goals are. Like, it's not like just to sell them on more or anything, but it is to say like your brand is so much more than your logo.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's a situation where they're coming in and they're saying, well, our business has been around for 20 years and our logo's not that great, or, you know, it was designed in the 80s and you can tell that it was designed in the 80s. Like, then we have a conversation about what does your brand equity actually look like today? Like, how much value is behind the logo that you have today? And sometimes, even if it makes us cringe because we know that the logo's not good, we know that we can't change the logo because
Right.
there's so much value behind it. There's so much awareness behind it from a customer perspective. And so we're like, no, you shouldn't actually redesign your logo. But here's what we can do to kind of bring it into 2019 or 2020 or whatever, and help you achieve your goals.
Right. So Similar situation. It's just somebody coming in asking for a logo. Like, how do you start the process when somebody comes in and they say, we want to rebrand?
Similar question. I say, why do you want to rebrand?
Yeah.
And if it is truly just like they're tired of their current logo for whatever reason, then we'll figure out like, okay, well, is it just like you want to change something, or is it because you feel like your brand doesn't match up with who your audience is, who your organization is, what your goals are, all of that.
Right.
And if it is a situation where like the brand doesn't match with where the organization is and where it's going, then we still have that conversation of how much brand equity is tied to what you currently have. And we'll figure that out in a lot of different ways. Like we'll look at, consumer data and all the nerdy things that Dustin loves. And like if there is a ton of equity behind it, like then we have that hard conversation of, do you still want to make that change? Like,
Yeah.
do you still want to potentially risk losing, this logo, which is valued at, thousands and thousands of dollars, sometimes
Right.
millions of dollars. And if they do, then, we're happy to do it, but we'll do it very intentionally. We'll put a lot of research behind it. We'll talk to them about doing consumer research, like in a big way, to make sure that the next decision that we make for their logo is a really intentional one and one that speaks to their audience and their goals and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just like, are you making a change just because you want to make a change, or are you making a change because
you're
a
ready
change
to.
needs to happen?
Right.
Maybe sometimes like we've done this where it's kind of a marriage between the two, where it's not a full redesign.
It's an
and you're
update.
It's an update.
Call those updates.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like you still keep the core integrity of the brand intact. Like you keep similar colors. Like you don't change the game but so much. But like you're taking it from like a weird 3D logo that was great for like the 2000s, and you're moving it into something that will work for today and be timeless.
Usable, flexible, and all the things that you want a logo to be, which is timeless is the biggest one.
Yeah. So before we close, let's talk about some fun things. What would you say is your favorite like design era?
Okay. It'd probably be Bauhaus. Like, I think that beyond design, what they did was really cool. Like, they kind of took from modernism and the arts and crafts movement and tried to find a way to bring well-designed, beautiful things into people's homes. And then their print design in general that they had was influenced by like modernism, suprematism, and constructivism. And so all those things together made for a lot of like really unique, really beautiful compositions that I don't think like people would have normally thought of, but it's still like undisputably good now, and people are still pulling from it to put in their designs today. And I think that's really, really cool. Do you ever read books or write things outside of work that influence your work at work?
Yeah,
Elaborate.
I do a lot actually, especially like if I'm getting ready to go into a big brand project where it's like full brand message guidelines and all of that. Like I'll know that I'll need to be in like the emotional space to write from the client's perspective in the way that they, need it to be written. And sometimes you can't do that at work. Like you can't get yourself in that mindset because you're going into meetings, like there's interruptions, like all the things. And so a lot of times I'll have like, it's like an emotional moment essentially, like before I come in to work or like the night before or something, where it's like I either read something or write something, or even sometimes I'll like draw something. I'm not an artist at all, but like I'll draw it just to like get myself in that mindset so I can actually write the way that it needs to be written. Do you ever like write or read something that like influences how you design?
I draw more than I write or read. But yeah, I think design is something that I'm blessed to be able to do every day, all the time, but it's also what I would choose to do if I was at home doing nothing, And so like the recent phases I've gone through, like the illuminated manuscripts or like the Bauhaus one, or like those always kind of trickle in to like designs and stuff, but it also helps me long term because I'm able to, when I get a new project, I say, oh, that element there kind of reminds me of how they did that there. Like, how can we use that in a way that is still relevant today?
Well, thank you so much. I think it's been really cool. We talk about design and brands and all the things all day, every day. But it's cool to just sit down and like officially talk about it. Well, thank you guys for watching. For more content like this, or just to learn more about us in general, feel free to follow us on social media or check out our website.